Well, guess we're talking about race again. Yeah, that's fine. All right.
Okay, good.
Back up, chump, you know Biggie Smalls rips it quick and kicks it quick. You know how black niggas get with the hoods, fatigues, with the boots, with trees. Flipping trees, making crazy G's. Hitting buckshots at niggas that open spots on the avenue. Take my loot and I'm bagging. Pimping hoes that drive Volvos and rodeos. Flash the roll, make a wet in they pantyhose. Damn, a nigga style is unorthodox, grip the Glock when I walk down the crowded block. Just in case a nigga wanna act out, I just black out, blow the motherfucking back out. That's a real nigga for you.
Hello and welcome to Select and Reflect, the movie review podcast where we look at films that have come out relatively recently at the cinema and see whether or not they still hold up. I am your host, Michael, and joining me as always is my other host, Luke, and today we are looking at Zootopia, continuing our theme of looking at Oscar winners. This, of course, won the Oscar for Best Animated Picture. Luke, would you like to tell us a thing or two about Zootopia?
Certainly, Michael. Zootopia was released in March 2016 in the United States, directed by Brian Howard and Rich Moore. And do you want to guess the budget and box office return?
Well, let's see. It's animated, so I'm going to go for 303. See, I'm thinking like films have very big budgets nowadays, but actually I'm going to go for £250 million budget.
Well, it's a lot less actually. It's only 150 million.
Well, okay.
There you
go. I wasn't sure. I've seen some astronomical budgets for some things. Anyway, and as for return, I'm going to guess 800 million.
It was higher. It was 1.024 billion. Look at that. Over a billion. Very successful.
Yeah. I clearly don't know how much kids like going to the cinema. Or I guess...
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? We do need to talk about this, because I wasn't even going to talk about this, but apparently furries liked this film.
I see.
Apparently that was not only a relevant demographic, but it was a demographic that the marketing team was conscious of, because there were apparently a few interviews where people in the marketing and various levels of production were basically saying, just, yeah, we know furries exist.
Yeah, I think I remember listening or hearing something about that, about how furries were going to Zootopia a lot. And I think, the marketing team probably embraced it. I mean, why not?
Yeah, it's a bit like kind of the bronies with My Little Pony.
Yeah.
Which I think the creators are cool with that. I guess they just like money. So, obviously, first of all, did you like this film?
Yeah, I liked it, yeah.
I would exactly say, yeah, I liked it. That would be my exact response to whether or not I liked this film.
Yeah, that's good.
But
I mean, it got like 98%. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say it got 98% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, but
which I was surprised how high.
Rotten Tomatoes is a hack website. They gave Suicide Squad 0%. Yes, even though we did like it, of course, we always start with nitpicks. So, Luke, did you have any particular nitpicks?
You know what? I did have a few, and that kind of makes sense based on the
premise,
the structure of the world. Yeah, the premise. Yeah, anthropomorphic animals living in a metropolis together.
Yeah.
So I'll just list a few. So they've got 12 districts.
Yes.
In the Zootopia thing, whatever it is, and one of these districts is the Canal District. Basically, when at the start of the movie, when the buffalo or the water buffalo, whatever the animal is, voiced by Idris Elba, he's giving the opening days like worked, and he's talking to Officer Hops, and I paused the movie to have a look at what the different districts were called, because in the background you could see a map.
Yeah.
And one of them was the Canal District, which I thought was, I don't know, it's not the best name for a district.
Yeah, it's a crap name. It's a terrible name.
Yeah.
Only old people go to canals, not actual animals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was actually impressed because I found there were relatively few problems. Considering that it is a pretty ridiculous premise, I didn't have too many problems. I mean, the only thing I did think is that it's probably a bit far-fetched that they will be able to terraform 12 essentially distinct environments within one place. So I guess there's almost a sci-fi element to this film in that, obviously they don't play on it, but in the way that it is a very kind of advanced society.
Why is the snow district right next to the desert district, Mike?
I don't know, like sometimes people have their fridges next to their ovens.
Okay.
So
Yeah, good comparison.
yeah, we have at my house we have our fridge directly next to our oven. Stupid, really. It can't be the most efficient configuration, but that's just how they do it. Yeah, I assume. I mean, maybe it's like the Gobi Desert. Gobi Desert's pretty cold. The only nitpick I had that was really about it being animals was just that. Obviously, the rabbits have loads of children, and there's a bit of a joke in there about like I was one of 20,000. I don't know. They make a joke about how many children rabbits have, and obviously the reason rabbits have so many children is because they get killed. And the other thing is, there's a thing throughout the film about how 10% of 10% of the population are predators, and 90% of the population are prey.
Yes.
And of course, there's a reason why that is the case biologically. It's because the predators kill the prey, so the predators there needs to be a large population of prey. But of course, in this film, you don't have people dying en masse. So you realize, like, how can they possibly have a sustainable population when every single rabbit is having hundreds of children, and those children aren't being killed? So what I can only assume is that they are being killed somehow, and you just don't see it.
Wow, that's pretty dark.
It's just something they cannily ignore.
Okay. Well, speaking of dark, I've got another question here. Maybe you can help me answer it. It's kind of a nitpick.
Yes.
What do all these animals eat? Especially if they're predators, what do they eat?
Yeah, I don't know, because obviously you seem to just see them eating lollies. That's the only thing I remember seeing any of them eat, is lollies and cake. I would assume that the foxes eat leafy greens, because apparently kale and things like that, they actually have protein and calcium in them. So I think the foxes, they like to eat a bit of kale, a bit of broccoli.
What do the polar bears eat, though?
The polar bears eat what they eat in the wild, which is, of course, snow.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, actually, I wonder, because fish aren't established as having any sort of... I don't think you see any fish that are sentient.
Yeah.
So I wonder if fish, like, they're all just pescatarians. They eat fish, and that's kind of their source of prey.
Yeah, what are the fish not, intelligent? Can they not speak?
Or maybe it's in the same cinematic universe as Finding Nemo.
Maybe.
No, that would be impossible, because they go to Sydney and Finding Nemo, and it's filled with humans. So yes, I think that's my theory. The fish are stupid in this, and they get eaten. And maybe insects too.
It reminds me of, discussion about the fish. It reminds me of Noah's Ark, where he brought 2 of every animal onto the boat.
Yes.
What about the fish? What happened to them?
Yeah, I think...
He didn't need to do that, did they? So he kind of lied.
Yeah, he lied. He lied to us.
Yeah, it wasn't every animal.
My other nitpicks, let's see. There was a bit at the beginning, and I just noticed this. They have this play where they're talking about kind of what a perfect utopia, Zootopia, is. And they're saying, like, it's the place where anyone can be anything. And the thing is, they live in kind of a parody or an animal version of a middle American kind of
small town.
And you think, like, you wouldn't see someone in, a small town in Texas or, one of those kind of flyover states be making a play like, I'm going to go to New York City, because they hate New York. Like, they wouldn't, it doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
To have...
Exactly. I wrote that in my notes, like, this town should hate Zootopia. They should think Zootopia are a bunch of coastal elites.
Yeah, it's like, damn Zootopia queers. I don't.
Yeah. Gideon Grey, the fox who's a bully, definitely thinks like that.
Yes, he does.
He's definitely a Trump supporter.
He's definitely a Trump supporter. What animal do you think Trump would be if he were in this film?
Orangutan?
That'd be quite good, actually. Orangutan would work.
Yeah.
Orangutan.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I think the other thing I noticed, people do this a lot in films. They say keep the change, and maybe it's just I'm very stingy, but I very rarely find myself telling people to keep the change. And also it's because I like to limit my interaction with service people. Like, I just want to give them the money and stand there in silence until they give me. I don't have to go keep the change. But the other thing is, like, I mean, the elephant that she says it to is a knob. So basically, like, I understand saying keep the change Yeah, but he's not he's a racist basically,
Species.
or a speciesist, and she buys this ice cream off him and then says, "Keep the change," and it's like, why would you say that?
Maybe it was to prove that she was better than them. When they go low, she goes high.
Yeah, yes. Maybe it's because America needs to further enshrine their tipping culture, because of course, saying "keep the change" is basically just a way of tipping.
Yeah.
And you've got to tip, you've always got to tip at least 10%, even if the person serving you is completely horrible.
In America, it's 20%, Michael.
Well, yeah, I don't know what the rule is. I guess, yes, because I feel like, their rule is even if the waiter literally needs to do nothing, and they're automatically guaranteed a 20% tip. So I feel like if they're really bad, then they still get a 10% tip.
Okay, so in the middle of the movie, when the Buffalo, voiced by Idris Elba, is scolding Officer Hobbs.
Yes.
And saying, "Hand in your badge," when they're in the jungle.
Yeah.
Well, and Nick the fox, later on in the movie, a few minutes later, says, "You know what, we can have a look at the security cameras to show that, or to find the panther, that was attacking them."
Oh, yeah.
And why not right there, considering that Officer Hobbs was top of her class, a valedictorian and all that? Why wouldn't she say, hey, just if you don't believe me, have a look at the security camera?
I did not catch that, but that's a very legitimate nitpick.
That is. Yeah, I was thinking that, surely they've got, because I've seen the movie before. Like, oh yeah, why in this instant didn't they just say, have a look at the security cameras if you don't believe me?
Yeah, I mean, also I like how this is proof that having a society that's constantly under surveillance is very useful.
Yes.
Who would have thought that having everyone constantly under surveillance would make it much easier to solve crimes?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I bet it makes it easier to catch terrorists too, especially if you look at their internet and their emails and things like that. I bet that would be really useful to saving.
You know what they say, Michael? Got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear.
Exactly. I mean, if you don't have a evil panther roaming around getting abducted by wolves, then why would you not want there to be cameras everywhere?
Yeah, exactly. One more nitpick. Actually, two more. I just wanted to say, at the beginning when they say animals are divided into predators and prey.
Yes.
Well, what about the ones who are both?
Oh, you mean the omnivores?
Exactly. What category do they fit into?
Yeah, or not even omnivores. For example, birds are obviously carnivores because they eat bugs. No, they don't eat mice. But they also get eaten by cats. So yeah, you're right. Actually, there are some carnivorous animals that are eaten by other carnivorous animals. I didn't think about that.
And just one more nitpick at the end of the movie when Mayor Bellwether turns up, when Nick and Officer Hobbs. No, I'm going to call her Judy Hobbs, or from now on. And so,
Officer Hobbs.
Officer Hobbs. I was just like,
you have a lot of respect for her.
Yeah, exactly. So why should I call her an officer? At the end, obviously the Mayor Sheep Bellwether turns up out of nowhere, which obviously she needs to be there for you to realise she's the bad guy. But yeah, obviously it would be a bit, quite unrealistic in that scenario. Yeah, massive coincidence.
Yes,
that she just happens to be there. Yeah.
And I don't know if this even counts as a nitpick, but all I'm going to say is that when the film, when she goes to Zootopia, obviously they play this music, and for a second I was terrified that this film was going to be a musical, and the thing is, because there was obviously only one song by Shakira who plays someone called Gazelle, which doesn't. This seems like really obvious to me, but I would have thought immediately when I heard the name Gazelle, I was thinking, oh, it's Adele. That made I assumed that it would be Gazelle Adele.
She was too thin to be Adele. So she's a gazelle called Gazelle. So that would be like you being called human.
Yeah, it would be like.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's no one called Fox. Yeah, there's no one else who's just named after. I mean, I would assume that's her stage name, but still, I bet there is probably a singer or an artist of some description in the world right now who is called Human, but it's probably spelt kind of clever. They probably think they're really cool. They're probably not very popular, but yeah, they're called Human, and maybe they spelled it like Hugh, like Hugh, and then man, and I think they'd be the type of person who kind of just freestyle rap battles behind some bins in Morrison's. Like, all right, my name's Hugh Man, and then like the YouTube intro plays, and then he does like his freestyles.
Yeah, I think it's more of a Tesco thing, but
It's more of a, that is true.
I just want to say about Gazelle. Yes. You know, when she holds that, what is it, like a protest? I was thinking, she'd be characterized as a liberal elitist.
Yeah, well, she's a bit like Shia LaBeouf with the "he will not divide us."
Yeah,
beautiful, and he won't.
Yeah, one of those celebrities that doesn't understand middle Zootopia or whatever.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's so. Yeah, I don't really count that. I didn't really like the music, but then I was happy that there wasn't that much music. I used to like Disney music. Well, the thing is, I guess obviously this isn't a Pixar film; it's a Disney film. Pixar never do music. Well, they do music, but like not musical numbers. But I was worried that this would be like a Frozen thing or a Tangled thing where they'd have actual songs. I was very happy they didn't have actual songs.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I guess I want to talk about the characters now. Well, I only wrote about Judy Hopps, but
Officer Hopps, Michael.
Officer Hopps, Policeman Hopps, Policewoman Hopps,
Policewoman Hopps, or police, yeah. Cop Hopps, Hop Cop.
I just saw when I didn't realize I'd done this during the training scene where she kind of becomes head of a class. I wrote that it reminded me of Full Metal Jacket because have you seen Full Metal Jacket?
No.
Okay, well, you've definitely seen it parodied anyway. Basically, there's this fat guy called Pike, I think, and he does really badly. And then he starts getting really good at it. Like, he kind of starts becoming a really good shooter and things like that. And you think, spoiler alert, that that the film's going to be about him, and he's going to kind of be that guy who triumphed over adversity and things like that. But then he has a mental breakdown and he shoots himself. So when I was watching, I was just like, because it's kind of like you've got this thing where she's like struggling with it, and then she kind of gets over it. And
you thought she was going to shoot herself?
Yeah, I thought she was going to shoot herself.
That would have been great.
Yeah.
Oh, well then.
I thought it was interesting that you're supposed to like her as a character, and they give her the job of giving people tickets. And I think like that job is a very kind of unlikable job in the popular consciousness, and it's kind of like I found it interesting how they did it, because it was like she was like, I'm going to give everyone tickets, and she was giving all these people tickets, and it kind of brought me back to Parking Pataweo in a way, because it's like
everything always comes back to Parking Pataweo.
Yeah, it always comes back to Parking Pataweo. They're kind of presenting this her ambition of giving everyone tickets as like, yeah, she's going at it, she's giving it 110%, and yet she's doing this thing that would irritate most people if it actually happened to them, which I thought was an interesting choice in terms of making her likable and showing her develop as a character. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of enforcing laws that stop people from being able to park wherever they want. But I feel like there are a lot of libertarians who would be kind of harassing her. Like, I think they could have done with some. You know what? Actually, this film could have done with, in Arrival, there was the Rush Limbaugh character, Limbaugh, every time the Rush Limbaugh character, who kind of represented like the middle America kind of suspicion of these government. This film could have had one of those. I think it would have worked quite well given the totality of the context of the film to have someone he could have been a bore too, and that would have been clever. Because it'd be like a bore, and he'd be boorish, and he'd be like, "Oh, he's coming." Blah, 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 blah.
He should be a screenwriter, Michael.
Yeah, he should be a screenwriter.
What channel would this bore be on? Would it be on a channel that begins with an animal's name, that has news after it?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I see where you're going, and that's actually a very kind of clever point. I guess, yeah, they definitely could have gone for Fox, but they didn't. No,
because in this society, foxes are the oppressed, so it wouldn't really make sense.
This film, it's kind of, so obviously there's this thing in films where they're supposed to be made for parents, and they're supposed to kind of deal with themes that are relevant to parents, and this film, it has a very kind of depressing note at the beginning, where it's pretty much just about how all your dreams and aspirations that you had when you were a child are just doomed to fail because she there's a scene where she kind of confronts the fox, and I've forgotten his name already, and I should remember his
Nick.
Nick, yeah. She confronts Nick, and she says like, "I'm going to be a police officer or whatever," or "I'm a police officer." And Nick basically kind of does this thing where he tells her entire life story, like, "Oh, let me guess, you graduated top of your class and you thought it was going to mean you make it in the world, but then you realize the real world isn't that good." And I was kind of thinking, obviously nowadays there's this thing for millennials where it's like you do really well at university and you succeed at all this stuff, and then you get into the world and you find like, oh wait, you can only do a job as a barrister at a coffee shop and things like that. And I was thinking, I imagine it hits pretty heavy, especially when you're like 30 or early 40s, well, maybe even early 20s, the age when you'd be having, late 20s, sorry, the age where you'd be having young children. I feel like this having an anthropomorphic fox just tell you about all your hopes and dreams and how you're never going to achieve them would hit quite hard.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't really know what to say to that, but yeah, that would be that would be quite demoralising if your whole life was torn down by an anthropomorphic fox.
Yes. But yeah, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about before we go into the plot, and this is something that you didn't write anything down about, but I wanted to talk a bit about the humour of this film, and again, kind of going back to the how these films are sort of for parents, generally speaking, or older people. One of the things that usually happens in these types of films is you get some attempts at humour to keep the parents or older people entertained. And
yeah,
I've got to be honest, I didn't find this film that funny, which I guess is possibly why you didn't write anything about humour. But yeah, there were
funny.
There were a few moments where you could tell that they were trying to make a joke. Like, I wrote down the two things I wrote down that I thought weren't very funny were, there's a bit where a fox says "dunna" instead of DNA, and I just thought that was a bit stupid. And then there's another bit where Idris Elba says, "It's time to address the elephant in the room," and you're like, okay, like, we know where this is going. And then he points around, he's like, "Ugh," and there's an elephant there, and that's the joke. And it's kind of like, I guess like children would be like, oh, that's funny, because children find stupid things funny. But I don't know, for me I was just like, well, we know where this is going, and it went there.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, the first thing with the DNA, I think that's just meant to show that the fox is kind of stupid. I don't think it's really meant to be that
I don't
funny.
know. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. The other thing is, they had a joke about elephants not being able to, well, the joke about elephants never forgetting, and obviously then they go to see Nagi, I think is her name, the elephant.
Oh, that's well remembered.
Yeah, I know.
You can't remember the fox's name, but you can remember the elephant that shows up for 30 seconds.
But I was going to say, they did that same joke in the Jungle Book, where there's a guy called Colonel Harthy who's an elephant in the Jungle Book, and they say like, he's like, an elephant never forgets, and then he does forget things, and that's the joke. So it's not a great joke to begin with, and then they repeat it. Although it was quite funny how you've got this guy, and he's like a stoner, and I think he's a moose or a yak, and he is asking Nagi about like what she saw and what she remembers, and he's kind of, I don't know if he remembers, but he's like telling her, he's like, don't you remember? He came in with this red hat and his, tie in XYZ, and he kind of gives this elaborate explanation. And he does it all under the premise of, like, don't you remember? And the joke is, he remembers it all. And that was funny. And...
Was it?
Well, I think maybe it was like kind of a little thing that I like. It's a good example of kind of clever exposition, I guess, because it's like exposition but in a clever way. Because it could have just been, they go to see the elephant tells them next scene, but instead it was they go to see the elephant.
Fair enough, yeah. That's a good point.
And then the other things about humour, there's a bit where well, the guy being based on The Godfather is inherently quite funny in the way that references are, inherently funny. But I like how he said the words skunk butt rug.
Wow.
I know. I realised when I don't know why it just made me laugh, and then I thought that the thing is obviously the humour is very subjective, and that's why I think it kind of makes not much sense to talk about humour too much. But
what did you think of the sloth?
That was the last
DMV
thing I had written down, and I wrote that it was obvious, but I'd give it a pass because I think it's clever.
I think it was in the original trailer for the movie. I think that's why it got a lot of traction, maybe, because the joke was kind of funny, like it's sloths running the DMV.
Yeah.
I think the joke went on for a bit too long, but again, that may be the whole point of it, because the sloths are really slow, so the joke is stretched out just like the sloths' speeches. So
yeah, I think it was a perfectly good joke, and I think that's a good example of like a joke that the older people watching it would chuckle at.
Yes.
I think that's the only other thing I really wanted to talk about before we get into the kind of symbolism is the actual plot. So why don't you start us off there?
Well, obviously the plot is about Judy Hopps solving the case of all these missing animals. Where have they gone? What's happened to them? And I thought, to be honest, the plot was fairly good. I think it was entertaining. I mean, obviously it's a movie for kids, but I wasn't really like looking at my phone or whatever throughout watching the movie. It kept me engaged. Well, obviously, maybe it's a bit of a cliche. You've got these two partners. One is the opposite to the other, and they have to solve a case together. And you see them interacting along the way, and that makes up a good portion of the movie. But I thought the plot was good. What did you have to say about it?
It's kind of like a buddy cop movie in a way, except
different. Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm a fan of buddy movies. I was thinking actually on the subject of humour that the gold standard for humour I think is probably the Shrek films, which are Shrek 1 and 2. I don't think 3 and 4 and 5, which isn't even out yet, are going to be very good. But
is there Shrek 5?
There's going to be a Shrek 5 in 2019 or something. But I don't think yes. Let It Die. But the first two are very good, and they have that buddy cop element, and I think this is a good buddy cop film. It's also a mystery, and I inherently, I think, am drawn towards mysteries. I like when it's kind of you can't see where it's going, and there's all these things kind of falling together, and then you find out the solution, and it basically explains everything. And I think that's a good way to give the plot a lot of momentum. And I didn't think it was particularly predictable. I mean, obviously part of it, I guess, was because the whole Night Howler thing was a completely in-universe thing that was only introduced right at the end. So obviously the reveal is, or the mystery, I guess, is that people are going missing, predators are going missing, and the first reveal is that they are becoming savage and being put in these prisons by the mayor. And on that note, I thought it was quite clever that the mayor, who is a lion, was kind of a good guy, but also, I mean, he was sort of a bit of a Diamond Joe Quimby kind of character. I feel like the mayor was sort of a take on your corrupt Democrat, where it's like he's corrupt in a kind of the way that the Kennedys had some corruption going on, but you like him and he's not as overtly evil as a Republican.
I guess so. I just thought he was I think maybe you're reading a bit too much into that. I just thought he was a corrupt corrupt. Yeah, he was just a politician who was only concerned about himself. Was a bit of a narcissist.
Yes.
And just wanted to keep himself in power.
Yeah, but I thought it was
Yeah.
clever that that was his motivation, and yet he wasn't the film's main antagonist.
Yeah, that you're right. That was clever. Yes.
So, but then, obviously, what's revealed is that they find out that what's causing the animals to go savage is this drug called a night howler, which is what we find out the fox is. The fox, what's his name again? Not Nick. The stupid fox.
Gideon.
We find out
Gideon Grey.
Gideon called Christian Grey. We find out that Gideon called them night howlers, and obviously that's an example of kind of a lot of people don't like that in mysteries when the reveal is something that you couldn't have possibly known as an audience member. And I guess it might have been nice if they had set it up in some way, because you basically don't find out anything to do with these night howler things until the moment that it's revealed and she works it out. And I think it might have been clever so they go to see this weasel whom she had previously apprehended with some mouldy onions, quote, and it turns out that they weren't mouldy onions, they were night howlers. And I think it might have been a kind of clever bit of foreshadowing if you would have seen that he was carrying some kind of flowers or something, and then I think there would have been a bit more force to the reveal of, oh, that's what's happening, because then you'd be like, oh, okay, so there was, it was slightly more set up. I like when a mystery gives you kind of things that set it up but don't tell you what's happening, so you can kind of, that you don't know immediately, but then you can see that the information was presented to you in subtle ways throughout the film, rather than just having, we always used to call them night howlers.
Yeah, but it is a kids' movie.
Yeah, I
don't know. That's just what I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
It's like, I'd love to pick this apart a bit more, but it's a movie for children.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can.
I'm going to continue just a bit, because on the subject of things being predictable, the bit at the end where, so first of all, they're in the car, and the fox is eating blueberries, and he's like, oh, I thought you guys only grew carrots. I love blueberries. And then I feel like he's eating blueberries throughout the entire third act, just eating blueberries out the whole thing. And then Bellwether, the actual bad guy, shoots the fox with night howlers, and you think, oh no, he's gonna kill her, and oh, what a surprise, there were blueberries in there. And it's kind of, again, I feel like, it's for children, but at the same time, that's an example for me where it would have been, I think, better, because there's no benefit to knowing what's going to happen before it happens, so they might as well have just shown the blueberries once and then dropped it. Because the thing is, I guess I wasn't, and you probably weren't that surprised when it turned out that, oh wait, it wasn't night howlers, it was the blueberries that have been waved in our face for the last 10 minutes. Which again,
obviously,
it's a kids' film, but having said that, in that instance, I like I say, it's not as if children would need to have it made so obvious to them as to justify. I think it just seemed like too obvious, and I just think like, well, I don't think it would blow a child's mind if they found out like, oh wait, no, it was the blueberries, and you didn't need to be shown the blueberries a billion times before that actually happened. But yeah, I mean, it was fine, I guess, because ultimately, I mean, just because it's a kids' film, it wasn't going to end with the Nick tearing apart Judy anyway, so
that would have been a great twist.
Yeah. I think the last thing I wanted to say about the plot is I did feel it was very fast-paced in a good way.
Yeah. Well, I agree.
Yeah.
I think it was very engaging is the word I used. I think that's right.
Because I'm quite a fan a lot of the time of slower films. Not always, but a lot of the time I usually am fans of a film that kind of takes its time over each thing. But I really did like this film in terms of how, I mean, there were a lot of beats that were hit, and nothing really seemed to drag, apart from the stuff that was supposed to drag, like the soft scene. And a lot of people have said kind of, well, I've heard a common criticism, and this is a criticism of a lot of films, the bit where the buddies fall out, so they've been buddies and then they fall out, and a lot of people they don't like that when it happens, and they find it just kind of boring because that ultimately they're going to become friends anyway. which I would
Yeah.
have agreed with, but they didn't drag it out much at all. And the thing is, it wasn't just because one of the criticisms I've heard of that, which I think is a legitimate criticism, is that a lot of the time when that bit happens, you know, when they fall out, the film just stops to have like several scenes of them just feeling sad.
Like a montage.
Like what? Sorry.
A montage.
Oh, a montage. I thought you
Yeah.
said Avatar.
What?
Avatar.
Yeah.
No, the classic example that actually, ironically, happens in Shrek, which I did say I liked. But in Shrek, they really drag it out, and it does literally just stop the plot. And then things like Bug's Life, it happens, and it just stops the plot. But this one, you know, I mean, they've fallen out, but while they've fallen out, she's still working things out. So it's not as if it's kind of just, oh, they've fallen out, now she's just going to mope around for ages. So I did think they handled that well. And again,
Yeah. Nick had good motivation as well for the fallout. And oftentimes in these kind of movies, maybe the motivation is a bit like weak.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't really make sense. But you know, he had a good motivation for not wanting to be around Judy Hopps anymore after
because
she called him a savage.
Yeah, because she was a racist, which is a big part of what this film is low-key about.
Really?
Really?
Oh my god.
Actually,
you know, I thought race. Are we going to talk about race?
Yeah, we're going to talk about race. That was my fantastic segue.
Oh, great. You know, it was really race in this movie was really subtle.
Yeah.
You know, you have to look deep.
Yeah.
You know, and examine it to understand what the writers were trying to convey with the plot.
I think they were trying to convey that racism is good.
Ah, yes, maybe.
No, you know what? Just before we get into race, the one thing that I did think was interesting was, I think the people next door to her were supposed to be gay.
Are you sure?
And I just thought, like, obviously that's not a race thing, but I was kind of, I mean, I don't care, and it's just one of those things where it's like, there's nothing wrong with it, but then you notice it, and then you're like, are they going to do anything with that? And then they didn't do anything with that, and then it's like, well, I guess, you know, it's progressive to just have gay people just be gay people, and, you know, normalized to just, you know, you can just be a gay person, and it doesn't have to be a big part of the film. But yeah, I was kind of expecting them to have, like, I guess the closest they got was when they said, the guy said, we can get loud at night, and then they were arguing, and I guess
Yeah,
the implication,
they could have just been roommates, though.
Yeah, I mean, yes. In theory, they could have been roommates, which I guess is what you have to tell your kids if you're uncomfortable with telling them about the concept of homosexuality. And I think people who don't want to tell their children about homosexuality are the type of people who would definitely enjoy this type of film and wouldn't consider it to be evil, PC, Disney shoving progressivism down their children's throats.
Well, we'll get onto that later, Michael, because I've got some stuff to say about that.
No, I think the racing one. Okay, I'll talk about this because I mentioned when you mentioned the wolves being kind of the oppressed people and how it was interesting. One of the things that I thought was funny about this.
The foxes, Michael, do you mean?
Yeah, the foxes, yeah. But one of the things that I found kind of interesting is that the premise for this film is that thousands of years ago, predators used to prey on prey, and then they kind of, you know, evolved, or socially, I guess, to live together, and be friends and things like that. But then she says, well, you know, or the idea is, well, maybe there's something in their biology that makes them evil, pretty much, or aggressive. And one thing I did find interesting about that is, of course, the basic, if you're going to draw one-to-one comparisons, I guess you would say, especially seeing as in America, predators are supposed to be black people, African Americans, and prey are supposed to be white people. If you're just basing it on kind of the suspicion of predators and the kind of idea of, hey, we don't serve your kind around here. Obviously, but the funny thing is, of course, that historically, it's not the people who have historically been the aggressors who are the victims of oppression. So it's not as if thousands of years ago, black people used to prey on white people, and that's why we're suspicious of them. In fact, ironically, it's the opposite. It's that, well, hundreds of years ago, we preyed on black people by putting them in boats and moving them to slave plantations, and that's why that's why racism exists. So
it wouldn't really work though if you had 90% of the characters be predators and then 10% be prey.
Yeah.
Because it would why would the lions be scared of the sheep? It wouldn't really work in the context of this movie. But yeah, definitely it's the predators are meant to be African Americans, like you said, because what does the sheep say? 90% of our population is prey.
Yeah, and that is...
I looked it up. The African Americans are about 13% of the United States population.
Yeah.
So obviously the 10%, 13%, very similar numbers.
Yes. The things I noticed that weren't necessarily strictly about kind of predator thing was, one thing I noticed is when they went to the yoga place, obviously, I thought there was going to be a cultural appropriation joke, and there wasn't. And then the other thing is, there's a scene where I guess there's a jaguar who is played by a person with an American accent, but in my head I just imagine him being played by James Corden. I know he wasn't played by James Corden, but so
Wait, what?
There's this guy who is at the reception of the police station.
Oh,
and
yeah.
In my head, he just if you were to look at the character and kind of his dialogue, he's such a James Corden character. I can just imagine James Corden playing.
Yeah, but he's a bit camp though, isn't he?
Well, the thing is, James Corden is oddly camp. I remember...
Are you sure?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Okay.
I could just picture him as Smithy in Gavin and Stacey.
Well, the thing about...
the opposite of camp.
When my first experience with James Corden and the other guy who has faded into complete obscurity...
Matthew Horn, I believe.
Yeah.
Is his name.
Is that... My first experience, or kind of time seeing them, because I never watched Gavin and Stacey. I've seen episodes of it, but I never kind of got into the whole hype around it. And I just remember seeing them on, I want to say, Red Nose Day, kind of, the comic relief special thing they have, and they do a thing on there. And I think in that context, they were playing a gay couple. And then the next time I saw them was in Channel 4's... Well, next time I saw James Corden was in Channel 4's Comedy Gala. And he was with Patrick Stewart. James Corden basically had an on-stage actual argument with Patrick Stewart. So the next time I see James Corden, he's in a bed with Patrick Stewart, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry we fell out, oh, I'm sorry we had that big argument. I hate it when we argue. So basically my two exposures to James Corden have both involved him playing a gay person. So I think in my head I just immediately think that I think of him as camp now. But I guess if your exposure to him was Smithy, who isn't Smithy a handyman?
Yeah, he's a plumber or electrician, I think.
So unless he's working at that gay steel mill in The Simpsons. But yeah, his character, he says to Judy Hopps, I'm really impressive I was able to pick up seamlessly from that tangent.
Yeah.
Because for a moment I had that thought in my head when I leave a tangent where I'm like, what was I talking about? I managed to get completely back into it. His character says to Judy Hopps, oh, you're so cute. And Judy Hopps says, actually, bunnies can call other bunnies cute, but
yes,
other people can't call bunnies cute. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's what that's about.
That's a bit on the nose, I think.
It is a bit on the nose. But yeah, I think that's the bulk of what I really wanted to say about the race stuff, really.
Well, do you want to mention the other time it's a bit on the nose in relation to race? When the pig, I think, shouts at the leopard, I want to say, at the protest.
Oh, yeah.
Go back to the jungle, predator. Well, there's also the bit where Nick the Fox says, there's a them now.
There's a...
Yeah, exactly.
It's like in Tropic Thunder, when Robert Downey Jr. says, what do you mean, you people? Actually, I did want to talk about... So, obviously, an interesting decision, I think, was having Nick be a shifty con man thing.
Conforming to his stereotypes.
Yeah,
Because society wanted him. Well, what does he say? Society would view me as this anyway, so why don't I just be it?
Yeah, which I think it's an interesting thing in a way, because obviously I think it kind of changes the changes the dynamic of the film, because originally when you see him, you think he's just going to be a kind of very nice guy struggling with prejudice, when actually, I mean, he is a nice guy in some sense, but he's also, actually living up to that prejudice, but because of the prejudice. It very much reminds me of that song by Nicholas F. I believe it's called A Little Paragraph of My Life, where he's telling a story about how he sees a young black boy going to the shops and he steals some crisps. And Nicholas F. walks up to him and he says, "Hey, brother, don't steal things, because if you go down that path, then you'll get locked up, and you'll be doing loads of time in prison." So he gives this child money to buy these crisps, and the child takes Nicholas F's money and he steals the crisps anyway. And Nicholas F is like, I wanted to feel angry at him, but I just realized, like, that's just the mentality you grow up with when you're raised in these bad conditions. And I think that's very much true.
Okay. Well, there you go. There's a good bit of commentary then by Zootopia.
Yeah, I think
it's got a good message.
One of the things that is worth looking at is that I guess it would be very easy, and I think possibly not as interesting, to just have the victim of oppression be a completely fantastic person in every single way. But the problem with doing that is then, of course, it's boring, and the more interesting thing to do is to look at how can oppression actually manifest itself in actual negative attributes. And obviously in this case, for example, it's everyone says, well, if you're a fox, then it means you're really sly and shifty and all that stuff. And then, of course, that oppression is going to manifest itself in actually being sly and shifty.
It reminds me, Michael, of something I watched recently called American Vandal, a show on Netflix.
Oh, I was thinking of American Graffiti.
Yeah. It was. I saw it recently. It was about this guy who was being accused of drawing a load of dicks on a bunch of teachers' cars, and it's like a mockumentary kind of thing. And so he in the end is cleared. It wasn't him. It's found out it was just this girl who wanted to get back at one of the teachers. I can't really remember the details, but anyway, at the end of the series, he goes. This guy who was accused goes and draws some dicks on some teacher's driveway, and this teacher accused the kid of drawing the original dicks in the first place. And at the end, the main guy who's doing the documentary asks this kid, why did you do it? Why did you draw these dicks on this driveway? You didn't have to. And he gave the answers. What was it? It was like, well, people thought I did it, so why didn't I just go and do it anyway? They're very profound.
That's just like the scene in The Simpsons where Marge, she goes to prison and she sees this convict who is a really good painter, and he gets commissioned by Principal Skinner to paint a mural. A mural or a mural? I don't know, whatever it's called. The thing like, I think it's called a mural. Anyway, he paints it, but then Skinner forces him to paint this much worse thing. So he burns down the mural, and he runs away, and Marge finds him, and he's like, I promise you I didn't burn the mural. So Marge is like, okay, I'm going to help you escape. So she's distracting Principal Skinner to help this convict escape, and during that time he pours a load of gasoline all over Principal Skinner's car and sets that on fire. And at the end, Marge is like, I can't believe you lied to me. And he's like, here's the God's honest truth. I lied to you about the mural. but I swear to God, I did not burn Skinner's car.
Yeah, I remember that.
I just saw you. So that is two good stories about people drawing things and then being accused of vandalism at a school.
Well, that is great.
And they both coalesce to go into this issue of race. Do you have anything more to say about this issue of race?
Well, yeah, kind of. I just want to say, I think it's a good message for the kids, Michael. It's a good message for the kids. Disney is doing a great service here with this movie, encouraging kids to. On a serious note, it's good. It's good to see this kind of movie, especially if you're of a particular political persuasion. Because I imagine
persuasion that racism is wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Mayor Bellwether, the sheep, who obviously turns out that she is a fascist, just goes to show that even little people can be fascists. You know, it doesn't have to be some like Hitler-esque kind of guy. You know, a strong man can be the little people in society, the people that you don't really, that don't really get that much attention. They can also be fascists. So I think that's a nice message.
You know what, Luke? It's funny that you should mention Hitler, because I have a theory about this film that is going to blow the whole thing wide open. And I've been holding it in for a while, but no more. I think this film is secretly anti-Semitic. And I will tell you why, okay? So, the people in this film, what's revealed is that there's nothing wrong with the predators. Instead, they are being forced to.
Right, Michael. I can immediately tell where you're going.
No, ready for this? Okay. So, okay, I want to explain why. Okay. See, it turns out the sheep are the ones forcing the predators to do this stuff. Now, a lot of people don't know this, Luke, but a sheep is a common symbol for Judaism. Okay.
Oh my God.
Now, if you look up, the person who plays Mayor Bellwether is called Jenny Slate. Do me a favour, Luke. Look up a picture of Jenny Slate.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Now.
She's got a nose.
What? Yes. So you look at her, and guess what, Luke? And then you hear her talking, and she sounds really Jewish. And then, and this is where it gets worse, okay? She says, first of all, she says, like, the little guys. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but stereotypically, Jews are portrayed as being kind of weak and not physically strong, but very sneaky and using manipulation to get their way into power. And then, and this is the real kicker, she says, prey kills predator and I stay in power. And I think that this film is low-key saying that the sheep, played by Jenny Slate, who is clearly a representation of international Jewry, is in fact using hip-hop and things like that to create black violence, which is then used to prevent fear, and then by dividing and conquering all the other races, the Jews will rise to power.
Well, as we know, Disney is historically anti-Semitic.
That's what I was thinking, but then I was thinking, like, what if actually it's the Jews who were in charge of making this film, but they were kind of putting it in as like a little way of teasing. Do you know what, actually, I'm surprised, because I worked this out all on my little Todd, all on my own.
Oh my God, you really thought about this, haven't you?
And the thing is, I was surprised, because I looked up, like, I think I just typed in, like, Zootopia sheep Jew conspiracy, because the first thing I immediately thought when I thought about, like, oh, look, it's people trying to, I mean, I mentioned when we were talking about Get Out, about how I've been kind of immersing myself in alt-right media in order to understand, I don't want to say I understand their position like in the way, oh, I want to understand them, but like understand kind of how their mind works and things like that. Anyway, so I've been looking into it, and as someone who's done that, like immediately when I heard like, oh, forcing the races to fight each other, I was like, oh, you know, I bet anti-Semites would blame the Jews for that. And then I was like, hold on a minute, they're sheep. And then anyway, I went really far into it. But the weird thing is that as far as I can tell, no one else has come up with this theory except for me. I mean, that's it. It's like I don't even come up with this theory. Like I just came up with it as a joke, but I don't know. I feel like the fascists are really slipping when I do a better job of coming up with an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory than they do.
Yeah, I mean, you could like post this to like Stormfront, or I don't really know any other
I think it could
right-wing
probably
websites.
swing on Poll. Poll would like it.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, yeah, you
Yeah.
do well. Yeah.
I wonder how well it would do. Maybe I should try it, and then we can report back later. How long? Let me see how long we've been recording for. I think this is okay. I thought this was going to be a shorter discussion than usual, and I think probably there's going to be a few things that need to be edited out. But to be honest, Luke, I think that that's pretty much everything apart from just wrapping up.
Well, I just wanted to put this movie into a bit of context, Michael. Historical context. Obviously, this movie's main message, as we've discussed before, is about race. About how you shouldn't judge people by what they are in terms of species or I guess anything else. Don't discriminate. Basically, is the main message of this movie. And here's the thing: this movie came out in March 2016, and that was when Donald Trump was winning the Republican primary, or a lot of the Republican primaries in America. And the night that I watched this movie on, he was giving his State of the Union address as President of the United States. So I was just wondering, because if you've obviously you've seen these sort of I guess articles or arguments which end in "This is why Trump won."
Yes.
And so I was wondering if an argument could be made that movies like Zootopia, which try to promote diversity and shove it down America's throat, that is why Trump won. How about that? They don't. I mean, I won't make the argument because I think it's stupid, but could that argument be made? Because obviously, like I said, this movie came out around the time Trump was winning the primaries. What do you think? I'm not really being entirely serious.
I think this film is entirely responsible for Trump winning, Luke.
Well, I mean, the argument that would be made, this kind of stuff is why Trump won.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's the thing, yeah. Like,
Middle America don't want to have a lecture by Hollywood elitists while watching their movies about cartoon animals.
Yes, the whole "this is why Trump won" thing is so dumb because it's like, it's just like, yeah, I mean, the reason Trump won is because there's people who are against, racism and things like that, who are actively, and then I mean, the thing is, it's kind of like, obviously you've read Susan Faludi's famous work, Backlash, which deals with the significant backlash against feminism since the 1980s, and I mean, it's kind of, obviously, yeah, it's most of these things can be summarized as a backlash, and I don't think anyone can doubt, for example, that the reason why kind of America went into an ultra macho mode in the 80s with, we're gonna beat those Soviets up barehanded and gonna is because of this backlash against the broad progressivism of the 60s and 70s. So yeah, I mean, the problem is all these terrible crappy opinions that are held to by like these conservatives nowadays are just part of this backlash against progress. So yeah, I mean, most good things are the reason why bad things happen.
Well, I'm going to type in, Michael, Zootopia is the reason why Trump won. And I'm going to see what results I get. Zootopia is why Trump won. Let me see. Zootopia director slams Trump at Oscars.
Oh, that's why Trump won.
Yeah, that's why Trump won, even though Trump had already won by that time. But yeah, there you go.
Well, they knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
They were playing 4D chess.
I just wanted to take my kids to a movie called Zootopia about cartoon animals, and they shoved this diversity message right at me. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of these a leader's telling me what to do. I'm going to vote for Trump.
Yeah. I mean, it's sad to say, but that is, and obviously, I mean, we could talk about how Trump is just objectively terrible for people who voted for him because his policies are not good for the lower middle class and things like that, and the exact type of people who voted for Donald Trump are not going to benefit from any of his policies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just like, I mean, it kind of reminds you the whole like this is why Brexit happened, and it's like you just think it's being made by people who are gonna like not benefit from Brexit. So it's kind of like a guy from Sunderland who's just been let off from his job because people don't want to build a factory there when they don't have access to the EU. And then he sees someone say, I support, not being racist, and then they just say, that's why I voted. No, I don't know why I gave him an American accent. To be honest, I shouldn't say Sunderland, because, I mean, I can't do any accents, but Sunderland is one of my worser accents, so I'm just going to give them my accent.
Oh, that's why I voted Brexit.
There we go.
And that's more Newcastle. But what's the difference anyway?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, I think obviously these types of films. I think the thing is like films like this have all this kind of message has existed in films for a while, or not necessarily this type of message, but messages like this. I mean, I think since the 90s is when I really can think of it. A lot of these children's films have been going through this kind of deconstructionist kind of phase, and also this kind of PC kind of thing. So you can look at, for example, Mulan is about a woman who's a victim of sexism and she becomes a soldier. And that is, a progressive message. But then you've got, for example, I mean, obviously, Gaston in Beauty and the Beast is kind of a representative of toxic masculinity. So I do think since the 90s, pretty much every kids film has been, or not every kids film, but most kids films have been challenging these social
Disney's
ideas.
brainwashing your kids, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, it is just
to enact the liberal agenda.
Yes, I think it's...
Yeah, no, I think there is some truth in that. I mean, basically, I think because the progressive position in a lot of things is just like the right thing morally.
Yeah,
don't be racist, don't be a dick.
Yes, I don't think anyone can say there isn't a message to this film. People just say it's the right message, and I mean it's kind of like almost as if you said, for example, that Star Wars is brainwashing children to not support objective evil. Like Star Wars makes my kids not want to support someone who electrocutes people to death. That's shoving it down my throat, and it's kind of like that's the thing. Like obviously, or Lord of the Rings. Why don't you just listen to the Dark Lord of all destruction? When you got to fight him, that makes you just as bad as the Dark Lord of all destruction.
Yeah.
Because I mean that's the thing. Like racism, it should be one of those things where it's just like I mean I don't want to say this because I think saying this is a bit simplistic because there's obviously more dimensions to racism, but you kind of just want to say like racism should be that thing where it's just like obviously wrong and you can kind of go into it as a premise. Like films shouldn't have to be arguing that racism is wrong, and they should just be. I mean, films can explore racism and why it's wrong, but the idea that you still have to make films like this and be like, oh, how are people going to respond to this racism is wrong message is kind of...
If you view this film as political, I think that's the thing. Is this film like political? And I don't think it is, because I just think the basic message is don't, like I said, don't be racist. But obviously, there are some people who will watch this film, as I detailed before in my great accent, that will think that this movie is political, and that is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this film is not. Well, I think this film is less story oriented than some other films. Like, obviously, for example, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because I think race is definitely a very focal point in this film, especially with moments like, only other bunnies can call bunnies cute and things like that. Like, it's very clear what they're talking about in those situations. And I think, but having said that, I mean, the story is kind of, I mean, I kind of am thinking of Mulan in the back of my head, because I think, like, I don't know how you could attack this film for having an agenda and then not think that something like Mulan, where the whole point of the film is it's a woman trying to become a warrior, and not think that has an agenda, because that clearly has a agenda of gender equality and things like that.
Well, yeah, I think but that was, when did Milan come out, in the 90s?
Yeah,
I think politics wasn't as big a factor as it is today.
Yeah, that was when it was just about the economy, like Bill Clinton said.
Yes.
Just focus on the economy, and everyone was fine. That was when everyone had a surplus, and there was no reason to be angry at anyone. And then suddenly,
racism didn't exist before Obama.
That is, yeah. It's kind of, yeah, it's true, yeah. Obama came to power, and ever since then, well, you know what? Obama created racism. That's why all these problems with black people protesting and things, it all started with Obama.
Yes, exactly.
So,
Before Obama, we were all okay. No racism. Everyone got on fine. Then he had to be black, and then it all went to shit.
Before, I mean, what we learned from the Disney classic, I think in many ways a precursor to this film, The Song of the South, is that before slavery ended, everyone was just happy, and they, hung out, and they just sang little songs.
Yeah. These antagonists who want to, like, change everything, just let us be.
What I think this film could have used is the crows from Dumbo. I don't be no longer that racism.
I wonder, I think that would have been good, but I wonder how that would have fit in.
Yeah, I think it would have been. You could have had the whole Jim Crow joke.
I guess so.
No, I think yes. The racism issue. I mean, obviously, the thing is, this film was never going to be as intelligent as Get Out in its.
No. Of course. It's not very subtle at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think in this film, what I would say is the difference between this film and Get Out. The only difference between this film and Get Out, because there is only really one difference, is that obviously I think, well, regardless of what Jordan Peele says, I think that it's very reasonable to say that Get Out was kind of a horror film that made a lot of points about racism.
Are you white-splaining Get Out?
Yes. I think, Get Out was a horror film that made a lot of kind of interesting points about racism, whereas this film, which was made by white people, by the way, is kind of more like a film that uses ideas around racism to create this kind of conflict, and then the conflict is just used to set up a story, which is kind of more interesting. Well, it's not more interesting. It's more kind of a conventional story, just using the springboard of.
Yeah. What do you think they came up with first? The writers. This idea.
Point.
Yeah, the story, or obviously the message.
I think the story. Actually, I could talk. I think it is worth talking about this. So there's been a thing recently in children's films where it's kind of, what if X was alive, or what if X had feelings, or what if X had its own society. So of course, for example, there's Inside Out, which is, what if emotions were alive and had their own society. But then there's things like, for example, the Emoji Movie, which is, what if what if emojis were alive and had their own reality. And then obviously there's things like Toy Story, Bug's Life. Like, it's a common trope in Disney or kind of children's films.
So the race thing came after, basically.
Yeah, so I'm thinking this film just started with, well, what have we done? We've done bugs, we've done fish, we've done toys, let's do animals.
Yeah,
and that's really the origin. Yeah. And then they said, well, how can we make the film, slightly more interesting than the Emoji Movie? Let's give it a theme of racism, predator and prey. Yeah. So I do think this film started off as a story first, and then I think I think it started off as an idea, and then the story probably came from this thought of what if we had, a society where obviously there's racism in this society. What if there was speciesism in a different society?
Yeah. So the so the race element elevated the movie from just a standard cartoon movie about this imagined world to obviously an Oscar-winning animation and 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, and possibly the reason why it grossed over $1 billion. I don't know, but yeah, certainly it's not just your standard animation about cartoon animals. It's that race thing. It was a pretty clever move, and that's what elevated the film into me saying, like I said at the beginning, I liked it.
Yeah, although actually,
it was interesting.
It gets me thinking because obviously the first couple of Pixar films, particularly Finding Nemo and Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2, are beloved because they have kind of a very clear heart to them and a very interesting. For example, Finding Nemo, I'll just pick as the example. Finding Nemo has really good characters, quite a few good jokes, some really interesting environments, and a really interesting plot. And it does all of that without having to kind of use this crutch of political commentary. Well, then the question is, is it a crutch?
That's what I was going to say. Is it a crutch?
Is it just a way to avoid having to make a more interesting story? And I think the short answer is, obviously, it could easily be a crutch. It would be very easy to make a film which is just, these people are being bullied and things like that. I think this film could... I think it would have been more interesting, perhaps, if they would have had to come up with the story first. But I don't know if that could even work, if they could have come up with the story. So, I think the short answer is, they couldn't have come up with the story without coming up with the idea of race, because, the story is about predators being forced to attack prey. But I do think when you do something like that, because you're thinking in terms of modern society and kind of the meaning of it, it detracts a bit from the significance of the characters, because a lot of the characters become just
as just tools to tell the story. Basically, and the focus on the story isn't about the actual characters themselves, it's about the overall message. Obviously that's not the case in, like you say, Toy Story or Finding Nemo. It's strictly about the characters.
Yes,
but I think that's fine, to be honest. If they were going this route, because we've seen movies like Toy Story and Finding Nemo obviously before. So
exactly.
It's nice to see like something different where it's about there's a larger theme going on in the background.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that would be my point. I do think that probably. I think this film. I know I'm not reviewing this film relative to those films, and maybe we will never review those films. I don't know, but I do think this film probably is worse than the golden age of Pixar.
Yes.
However you want to. So I don't think this film is as good as Finding, and I do think part of that is because it's not purely about the characters and the story. Having said that, I think sometimes you need to make films that are going to be worse than other films, because they're stories that need to be told. And in this case, for example, I think even though, if you just said that you weren't going to make a film because you didn't think it was going to be the best film, then there'd be much fewer films made. And I think this film, it's a very good film, and I don't think they could have possibly made this film a fantastic film, because I just think it is too, it has to be simplistic a bit by its nature. It can't be about just characters. It has to be about these bigger themes. And obviously, the bigger you get, the more you kind of have to use these broad strokes. But yeah, like I say, I think even though it had that limitation of having to be very broad in how it painted the society, it's still a very good film.
Yes. Well, that's a good sum up, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, would you recommend this film? What do you rate it as well?
Yeah, no, I would recommend this film. I think Yeah, it's enjoyable from just a plot standpoint, like we talked about before, and the message is interesting as well, like we've also said. So yeah, I enjoyed this film. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I liked it. I'd watch it again. What about you?
I did enjoy this film. One of the things that I do think about films like this is, the context of when you would watch them. I felt kind of like I didn't necessarily enjoy watching this film on my own, I think, as much as I could have. And I also think this would be a film that I wouldn't necessarily want to see in the cinema. I'd say this is the type of film that, number one, I mean, obviously if you have children, which you and I don't, but if you have a family, then obviously watch this film with your kids. They'll really enjoy it. And, they're probably going to watch crap anyway, so you might as well make sure they watch something that you'll enjoy. Yes. And then alternatively,
they should put that on the they should put that on the box.
Your
the
kids
DVD box.
Yeah. But yeah, and maybe if it's a family holiday and you're looking through and what's on the BBC or ITV? Oh, they're showing Zootopia. Put it on. Maybe you don't sit in your room on your own in between games of Civilization and decide to watch this film in your dark, empty man cave for the purposes of reviewing it on a podcast show. But even having said that, even though I enjoyed it in that context, but I think you would enjoy this film more probably if you watched it in kind of a family context, whether it's with your extended family or your own family if you have one. But yes, good film. I would say, obviously not as good as Get Out, better than Dunkirk. And
yes, well, that's exactly what I said. Yeah.
Yes,
8 out of 10,
exactly.
Better than Dunkirk and not as good as Get Out. So yeah.
So that's fine. All right.
Yeah.
And we are, in theory, as I've mentioned, we are looking at last year's Oscar winners. However, next week is exciting. It's our first time looking at a film that we know is going to be crap, because we are going to be looking at 50 Shades of Grey, Part 1 and Part 2, in order to celebrate, commemorate, mark the release of 50 Shades Freed, which I don't know when it's being released, but sometime
it's
around
on Valentine's Day, I believe.
Yeah.
Because it's all about love.
Yes, because it's all about love. So have fun watching that. And I have been Michael.
I have been Luke. You shouldn't really say your last name.
I always do that. And I always cut it out in the edit.
Yeah.
And what have they been listening to, Luke? You always do this.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to our review of Zootopia. See you next week.
You're supposed to say the name, Luke. You haven't said the name.
Oh shit! Yeah, no. It's Select and Reflect. Obviously, we selected Zootopia and we reflected on it. So yeah. Thanks for listening.
Such a good name.
Yeah.
So proud of it. Anyway, all right. Bye.